The war between Russia and Ukraine is escalating on the eastern and southern fronts as the war in Ukraine hardens in the direction of Bakhmut and Melitopol. The Russian missile threat to the west of Ukraine continues when the latest reports are examined. A Russian missile may attack Lviv at any time because whenever the eastern pressure of the Ukrainian Armed Forces increased, Russia's missiles turned to the west. As you may recall, after Ukraine's Kharkiv and Kherson raids, Putin launched attacks on Kiev with Iskander cruise missiles. After the attacks on the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, Putin stated that these attacks were in retaliation for the attacks on the Kerch Bridge in Crimea and later deep into Russia. However, the most important point here was that Crimea was attacked and Putin's reaction to it because Putin, who could not afford to risk the Crimea, took much more serious measures and attacks to distract attention. Ukraine's Western allies, on the other hand, are trying to defend the Ukrainian airspace by sending a very serious defense support to Ukraine. After these attacks, we even saw the first Patriot air defense system arrive in Ukraine. These days, however, NATO sensed a serious danger for itself in Russia's attacks on western Ukraine and mobilized its troops in Eastern Europe. NATO has recently increased its military presence on the Russian border almost 8 times. There are 130,500 NATO soldiers in Poland, 20,800 in Lithuania, 9,000 in Estonia, 9,100 in Latvia, 15,100 in Slovakia, 79,300 in Romania, 24,800 in Hungary, and 26,900 in Bulgaria. At the same time, a very serious shipment of warplanes and armored vehicles was carried out to the NATO Eastern Bloc. The US Army wants to turn the Eastern Bloc into an impenetrable wall, and in this regard it has equipped the countries in the Eastern Bloc with the most advanced weapons and special units. In the last 3 months, in recent shipments, the US has sent 20 PF-64 Apache attack helicopters to Latvia, 1 squadron of F-22 fighter jets, 1 division M1A2 Abrams tank to Poland. In addition, HIMARS Patriot NASAMS systems were deployed to Eastern Bloc countries. Currently, the Russian and Belarusian borders are blockaded by HIMARS and Patriot systems, and at least 235 squadrons are stationed at nearby air bases. The largest share in the NATO task force belongs to the US Army, and with the latest statements, the presence of the US Army in Europe is over 100,000 troops. In January, it was announced that the US military presence in Europe was around 80,000. With subsequent deployments, this number is estimated to be over 110,000 troops. Potential deployments are particularly concentrated around Russia's European territory Kaliningrad, along with Poland's border with Ukraine and Belarus. On the other hand, a serious shipment is made to the Baltic countries. Preparations are increasing day by day as a result of a possible Russian attack. The United States brought its military numbers in Europe to the point of the Cold War long beforehand. It is stated that the number of US troops in Europe has exceeded 110,000 and that even more troops will need to be sent. Pentagon officials have announced that US troops sent around Europe on special missions may also need to stay in the region for an extended period of time. In fact, some units are thought to be permanent in Eastern Europe and especially in Poland. It is thought that Russia's hitting civilian infrastructures in Ukraine and the heavy defeats suffered by the Russian army at the front will lead Putin to a great stalemate and infuriate him even more. For this reason, the North Atlantic Alliance, on the one hand, is now taking initiatives for Ukraine to join NATO, and on the other hand, it creates a great deterrent by making the Eastern Bloc of the alliance an impassable wall. This wall is actually very important in 2 ways. The first is to definitively prevent a Russian attack that may overflow from Ukraine, and the other, and much more importantly, is the presence of a deterrent NATO force in the region against Russia. The start of official applications by Finland and Sweden to NATO presents new excuses for the USA to make a much stronger defense on the Baltic. While Finland's participation in NATO, which has been a neighbor of Russia for many years, creates a crisis in the Kremlin, the USA is trying to turn this crisis into an opportunity because the main reason for Putin's Ukraine operation was that Russia did not want NATO soldiers on its borders. However, it is far from the power and deterrence to carry out it did in Ukraine, in Finland. That's why the US Congress announced on December 20th the government funding bill for 2023, which includes allocation of $225 million as part of the Baltic Security Initiative, whose defense budget is $45 million or 20% more than 2022. According to the Estonian Defense Ministry, the United States will support countries affected by Russia's aggression with a total of $350 million as part of their defense budget. Jonathan Vaisalov, Secretary General of the Estonian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, said this decision is a clear example of the long and determined support of the United States to the Baltic states. Estonian Defense Minister Hanno Pevkur said this year we have made significant progress in increasing our defense spending and strengthening our defense, and U.S. support is helping us further develop our independent defense capability. Jonathan Vaisalov also said that this is an important step that is the result of Estonia's long-term work. Estonia is very important to the USA and NATO because Estonia forms a bridge to Finland. Considering that the strait established between the port of Tallinn in Estonia and the port of Helsinki in Finland will restrict the port of St. Petersburg, Russia may put Estonia on the target board. For this reason, it will be inevitable for NATO to take very serious measures in the region. In addition to the Baltic countries, support will be allocated to other countries bordering Russia. $35 million will be given to Poland, $30 million to Romania, $20 million to Bulgaria, and $14 million to Georgia. Funding is project-based, and implementation of projects will be coordinated by the United States European Command. In addition to the $9 billion allocated to Ukraine, an additional $300 million will be allocated. The Baltic Security Initiative, created in 2020, enables the United States to support the development of independent defense capabilities of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, as well as their interoperability in a more systematic way. Under the initiative, $169 million was allocated to the Baltic states last year with U.S. security assistance. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were able to implement many of their military infrastructure and capability development projects faster than originally planned. The main focus has been on the development of special operations, air defense, ammunition stockpiles, naval situational awareness, and long-range indirect fire capability. At the same time, the air defense of these regions is much more prominent considering that the general philosophy of Russia's attack is airstrikes. The presence of the U.S. Air Force in the region makes Russia more uneasy. The Iron Eagles of the U.S. Army took charge of aviation in Europe. Air Cavalry Brigade, 1st Cavalry Division, officially their colors. Combat Aviation Brigade, known as Iron Eagles, ceremony of authorization was held at 33rd Air Base in Poland. It is stated that the main purpose of these assignments is not to reflect Russia's attacks in Ukraine to Eastern Europe. A Polish Air Force Sion-30 cargo plane and Mi-17 helicopter held inside a large aviation hangar from the background of the ceremony. While Iron Eagle's aircraft can be lined up front and center outside of these operations and exercises, U.S. Army artillery reached Latvia as the Allies tried to deter Russia, service officials said. The U.S. Army is sending long-range artillery to Latvia for national combat readiness exercises, as well as local and allied forces. US Army, Europe and Africa said it had deployed two M142 high-motion artillery rocket systems with a dozen personnel in the Baltic nation, where security concerns were raised after Russia's full-fledged invasion of Ukraine in February. Colonel Richard Akina, artillery commander of the 1st Infantry Division, said the mission highlights the Army's ability to take up positions quickly anywhere in the European campaign. It was emphasized that the main reason for this was that NATO forces should be prepared in the face of a possible Russian attack. The HIMARS system entered Army service in 2005. The heavy warheads and rocket range of roughly 50 miles are credited by military analysts as helping to balance Russia's numerical advantage as Ukraine seeks to regain territory east and south. It is a fact that these weapons still increase the advantage of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Vladimir Putin saw that he could now only threaten Europe with outlier attacks. However, the West is unresponsive to Putin on this issue because he has been showing tongues under the table with empty threats for almost 1 year. These US deployments are in open contact with Russia, and the tension between these two countries may not be limited to Ukraine. The war between Russia and Ukraine has entered a new phase. The war has now spread to Russian territory. Things are not going as planned in Russia. This is increasing tensions in the country. So how did the war spread to Russia? Why are tensions rising in Russia? Let's answer these questions together. First of all, we need to understand how this war spilled over into Russia. The Kremlin was making very bold statements before this war started. The Russian army was planning to capture Ukraine without any casualties, but the Ukrainian army thwarted all Russia's plans. The Russian army has been routed. Now, there is a great fear in Russia because there are explosions, one after the other in Russia. Recently, there were explosions at 2 military airports. This was the beginning of a new process. Let's look at the details of these explosions to understand this new process. A fuel tanker exploded at Ryazan military airport southeast of the capital, Moscow, killing 3 people and injuring 6 others. The fuel tanker burned for hours, and the Russian government had great difficulty in extinguishing the fire. The explosion shocked the Kremlin at another military airport in the Saratov region. There was a powerful explosion in the area where Russian military aircraft were located. Russian planes were damaged, but these were not the only effects of these attacks. A state of emergency has been declared in Russia. The Russian military has increased security measures to the highest level in all military bases in the country. There is an important reason why the Russian military is in such a panic. The area where these explosions took place is further away from the missile range of the Ukrainian army. The Russian military never expected such an explosion. The explosions have therefore increased the panic in the Russian army. So how did these explosions happen? The Ukrainian military has not claimed responsibility for these explosions. Russia says the source of the explosions is still being investigated, but this is not credible. Russia is afraid to say that these attacks were carried out by Ukraine because this could further discredit Russia. Also, the Russian people are very angry with Putin because of these explosions. If it turns out that these explosions were carried out by the Ukrainian army, the anger of the Russian people against the government may increase even more. Support for the war in Russia is decreasing day by day. After the Russian army suffered a major defeat in this war, criticism of the war started to increase. Millions of Russian citizens are revolting against Putin's government by organizing anti-war protests. Putin is unable to suppress these rebellions. Putin has to win this war to suppress criticism against him. That's why the Russian media is trying to win the support of citizens by constantly reporting false news about this war. However, Russian citizens will learn the truth through their social media accounts, show more anger towards Putin. Could these attacks really have been carried out by Ukraine? Is the military capacity of the Ukrainian army sufficient for these attacks? Experts say these attacks could have been carried out by drones. The Ukrainian army has the world's most advanced drone technology. These drones have been very effective since the beginning of the war. Let's take a closer look at these drones. Bayraktar drones produced in Turkey are one of the most important weapons of the Ukrainian army. Bayraktar, an armed unmanned aerial vehicle, has a maximum altitude of 27,000 ft. In this way, it cannot be detected by many radar systems. Using these drones, the Ukrainian army made continuous detections in the regions occupied by Russia. All movements of Russian soldiers were monitored minute by minute using these drones. The Ukrainian army has inflicted enormous damage on the Russian army's tank stockpile. A total of 2,940 Russian tanks have been destroyed since the beginning of the war. These tanks were the most powerful parts of the Russian army. As a result of the destruction of the tanks, the Russian army could not continue its ground operations. Ukrainian drones managed to stop Russia's operations. One of the most important features of Bayraktar drones is that they have a 27-hour airtime. In this way, they can carry out successful operations even at very long distances. It is believed that the Ukrainian army carried out these attacks with Bayraktar drones. The most important feature of Bayraktar drones is that they leave no trace behind. The Ukrainian army has achieved great success in all its operations with these drones. Since the drones also recorded video footage, videos of the operations are constantly shared by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. These videos are the biggest proof of how big a defeat the Russian army has suffered. Russia is very afraid that these attacks will continue. That's why security measures have been increased at military installations and oil resources in the country. The Russian economy is based on the sale of oil and natural gas. Explosions in these facilities could cause damage to the Russian economy. The Russian economy is in historic decline. The Russian ruble continues to lose value every day, and the Russian economy is drifting towards bankruptcy. Russia has to increase its oil and natural gas sales to avoid bankruptcy. However, after the recent explosions, there has been a major disruption in Russia's oil transfers. The Russian government is trying to increase security measures regarding the transfer of tanks carrying oil. However, this has severely affected oil sales. Russia has lost millions of dollars in just 3 days. The deterioration of the Russian economy is also making Russia's citizens very angry. New hikes are coming every day, even for basic food products in Russia. This situation increases the anger of Russian citizens against Putin. There are new polls on support for Putin and Russia. The percentage of those who support Putin has now fallen below 30%. And for the first time in history, Putin's opponents are angry. Putin, who has ruled Russia since 1999, is experiencing the most difficult days of his political career. There are already discussions in Russia about who should replace Putin. Competition for the post-Putin era is also increasing among the top bureaucrats working in the remnant. It is thought that Putin can no longer rule Russia. However, it is not yet known exactly how Putin's political career will end. The biggest determinant will be the success of the Ukrainian army in this war. Support for Putin continues to wane as the Ukrainian army's successes grow. Zelensky manages to defeat both the Russian army and Putin. If the explosions in Russia continue, Putin may have to resign. If the war drags on, it is predicted that the Russian government will change in the first general election in Russia. This situation worries Putin a lot. What do you think about these explosions in Russia? How do you think these explosions affect the course of the war? Do you think Putin's political career will end as a result of these explosions? Do you think Putin will resign?